Perhaps you're thinking about starting a podcast, and one of the things you're trying to figure out is what is the deal with podcast seasons? Are they recommended? Should you have them? Why would you have them? Why not? So if you're wondering about podcast seasons and whether you need to do them, this episode is for you. Stick around to the end. I'm going to go through why podcast seasons exist and discuss whether they're a thing that you should do.
Welcome to Magnetic Pod. If you are looking to attract your soul clients while doing the work you love, this show is for you. Hi, I'm Olivia D'Souza. I'm a podcast manager and content repurposing specialist. The Magnetic Pod Show is about attracting your soul pod of clients through podcasting. It will also include things that can be applied to other areas of your marketing strategy too. Hit subscribe to join me in calling in the people we are here to help. Let's make a massive impact.
I am here and I'm ready to be brave. Cannot miss me, I'll stand on every stage. I'm available for my destiny to reach my people.
Okay, so before we get into it, remember, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of the tips and strategies on how to have a podcast that generates leads for your business. Okay, let's get into it. So the thing is, sometimes podcasts can feel a bit overwhelming. They are a commitment. If you want to have a successful podcast, you want to pick a schedule and become reliable and release your podcast when you say that you release your podcasts. So that could be weekly or fortnightly or even daily, depending on, that's pretty full on. But if you're like a current affair type podcast or something, or a daily meditation podcast, there's all sorts of formats. So it's a big commitment. And in some ways, it feels like a big commitment, especially if you do everything yourself and decide that you want to edit and you're going to do all the audiograms and you're not going to outsource anything. It's a fair amount of commitment. But when you think about it, it's kind of less in a way than social media, because generally it's once a week or perhaps once a fortnight, whereas social media is every day, and if you follow some advice, 4 times a day. So it's less in that regard, and you can repurpose it. So there's that to keep in mind. However, it's still a commitment, and the week or the fortnight rolls around really quickly. So the thing with seasons is it's a way to give you a bit of a break. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I think consistency is really, really important with podcasts. But that said, you can have a break every now and then. And seasons give you a structured way to do that. So I liken it to any good habit, like just with diet and exercise, for example. Eating well, it's probably a better word than diet. But if you want to get fit, then what matters is what you do the majority of the time and that you're consistent. But if you have a short break, then as long as you've got that commitment to get back into it before you lose your fitness, it's what you do most of the time that's going to matter. So you can have a break, and seasons allow you to do that. So you can think of seasons like a TV series, and TV series will do a certain amount of episodes and have a break and then come back and do a next bunch of episodes. So it allows you a bit more time for planning in between, or just simply to have a break. And you can use that time to send out emails and still remind people of your previous episodes that you've done. Another reason you could use seasons is to organize your content into themes. And sometimes this happens because of planning, and sometimes it kind of happens just because you evolve. So I know of people who have had a podcast season where they read an audio book, like their own book, like they can't be bothered doing all the requirements that might be met for an official audio book on Audible or something, but they like just to be able to use their own podcast and just read a chapter a week, and then a season will be them reading their book, and they use that as a way to get people to keep listening to each episode and to also sponsor themselves, like they'll just advertise their own programs or whatever in between, in the intro and outro, and they use that as a bit of a marketing tool to promote other things that they have, and the book is the tool that helps them to sell other offerings they've got. And so they do that for a season. Sometimes seasons are also used for a time where they can have an overarching theme where they cover a particular thing. One of my podcast clients focused quite heavily on COVID and educating people around that because she was a researcher is a researcher, and she was able to give people evidence-based information so they could decide for themselves. It's also used as, sometimes it can be a time when people might rebrand, like this person I'm thinking of, Anna Cusack. She started off with Motherhood Made Magic was her podcast, and then she rebranded to Anna Asks, and she decided she shifted the focus a bit and wanted to hand the microphone over to people who are minorities and don't get heard as much in society. So there was a shift in focus, and the end of one season and beginning of the next was a marking point or a turning point where she could put a line in the sand and say, I'm going in this different direction. That was another client as well, did that. That was Carly Marie. She had Go Hack Yourself was her podcast, and she rebranded at one point and called it Genius Unleashed, and went in a bit of a slightly different direction with her podcast and put my music in it. I'll give myself a plug there. My music's in her podcast. So it can be a time where you can go in a different direction. But you don't have to have seasons. You might find that you are fine just batching, and you batch like a king or a queen, and to the point where you never have to take a break. So that's fine. There are no rules. And there's no rules as for how many episodes or how many seasons even. For most people, a longer podcast is what will work, because we don't have, most people don't start out with a massive platform. If you're someone who's already got a big following, like a huge following, you might be able to get away with just having one season for something, and your following is big enough to give that podcast exposure. But a lot of us need to be doing it for a while and build up that following. But you can have a season that's just for one thing, and it's 5 episodes even. You can have anywhere from 5 to 40 in a season, or anything you like. There's no rules about how long a season should be. And you could just have one season that's just reflecting one thing. I've released a book and I'm going to read the audiobook, and that's all the podcast is for, and it's over. Or it could be something that it goes for years, or anything in between. There's also certain times of the year that there tends to be less listeners around, say, Christmas, December. So you might decide that it makes sense to have a break there. Or if you don't want to have a break and you want to keep putting content out, the other option is, if you've been doing it a while and you've got a bank of episodes, you could instead just repurpose, do the best of, and do something that's still putting content out, but you're still taking a break, and you just pay someone like me to sort out putting content out over the quieter times. So, in conclusion, you don't have to have seasons, but they can be a good way to organise your content into themes. So you could pick one area that you want to focus on and break it down into subtopics that are each episode, and that's a season. Or they can actually be the same every time. They are optional, and they're a way for you to take a structured break and then get back into it again, and to still communicate clearly what's happening to your clients or to your listeners, so that they know, I'm taking a break, I'll be back, make sure you subscribe, all those sort of things. As for myself, I think this is a great opportunity for me to announce the end of Season 1 of Magnetic Pod. Now, this first season has been focusing on lead generation and podcasting, and has all been solo episodes. So the purpose of this podcast is to serve you, the listener, who is hopefully my ideal client as well. And my ideal client is looking for ways to grow their audience and their business, as well as share their message that they are passionate about. So I have just been focusing on that, and it is always my priority to serve what the listener needs. The next season, I plan to do interviews and to also bring in other aspects of lead generation that will also serve my client. But as well as serving my client, the podcast will also fulfill another requirement, another goal, which is to expand my network. As in, for example, if I want to create collaborations with other people in business that I admire, that align with me, I can invite them to be a guest on my podcast and get to know them a bit better. I can learn from them myself, and I can share that knowledge with you, and I can open up opportunities, sometimes that you can't even predict, by just getting to know other people in business better, and using your podcast for that it is an incredible networking tool. So I'm going to start using that. And also it's a leveraging tool so that if I have guests on the podcast, it's not a requirement, but bonus points if they have a podcast that I can be on as well. So that way we both get in front of other people's audiences and we leverage that to grow our audiences. If I get in front of their podcast audience, then they are people who listen to podcasts and they are people who are more likely to also listen to my podcast and vice versa, so that we are helping each other. So podcasts are incredible networking tools. So I'm going to start taking advantage of that benefit of podcasting as well. So thank you for being here. Please make sure that you subscribe so that you get the first episode of season 2. Also jump on my mailing list and jump in my group Magnetic Pod on Facebook. There are lots of episodes that you can go back on and that will benefit you if you go through the back catalogue. So I'm going to take a couple of weeks off and I will see you when I get back. Have a great day. Bye.
I am here and I'm ready to be brave. Cannot miss me, I'll stand on every stage. I'm available for my destiny to reach my people. Gonna be a star, so if you pass on me, that's a shame for you, but
Hello, it's Livy here. Have you ever wondered about what the key elements are that make a podcast truly stand out? Or maybe you're thinking about starting your own special podcast and feel a bit overwhelmed and don't know where to start? Well, I have something for you. Introducing the Ultimate Podcast Checklist. Da, 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 da. It's a step-by-step guide that covers everything from the initial brainstorming to advanced growth strategies. It's the perfect companion for both new and seasoned podcasters. And the best part, it's absolutely free. Da, 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 da. To grab your copy, simply head to the show notes of this episode and you will find a direct link there, and then away you go. Remember, every podcast started with that initial spark and the right resource, so let the Ultimate Podcasting Checklist be yours.